already decided you probably don't need one. Sure.
I don't. Thank you. Sheriff, how y'all? How you start? Grand. How you do it every day? Keep up on the rules. Hey, sir.
It's for a regular meeting. For one of my items that didn't make
Mr. Rector?
Mr. Chairman, I've gone ahead and opened the meeting up, so I'm going to let you start it when you're ready.
Okay.
Got the rate. Mr. Hill, how you doing? You have to turn it on and ice it, then turn it off.
Now, I'm going to go further down.
What business is coming there where our old building used to be at? What auto parts store is it? Yep. It's a, they're leaving up there on the top of the hill. The corner scheme kind of looks like them, but I thought they were right there. It is advanced. So they don't have two? They don't shut those down up there?
Yeah. Yep.
That's a bad place to try to get in there. You gotta go past it, come back down. So to get there. They bought it. Huh? They bought it. Hey, yeah. Works good from that standpoint. We ready?
Call to order the special meeting at 4:30, May 26th. At this time, I guess Johnson Controls? Is that right?
We don't have the X on the floor tonight.
They moved the table back.
Now, he's got a presentation I was going to pull up, so I think Christie was in the process of doing that right now.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Fred, Joey, whoever, are we getting the presentation there?
Perfect.
There we go.
That's the one.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, great. Thank you.
State your name for the record.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Newburn. I'm with Johnson Controls. So it's good to see everyone. This is my first trip out in a couple of months. So been quarantining over in Jacksonville where I'm based. So I'll go briefly through the project that we're going to be here talking about today. It's a project that we've been working on for the course of the last 6 or 8 months with the staff. And it deals with the new sheriff's office up on the Endeavor site. So next slide. So as part of the presentation today, I know that some of the commissioners were here as part of the first phase that we performed a project with the county around infrastructure renewal. That was back in 2016. But I want to make sure that I go over our experience, what our areas of expertise. Johnson Controls is a very diverse company. We operate in a variety of different markets, HVAC, fire, security, building improvements. In the area that myself and our engineer who's with me today, Craig Miller, we're in the professional services group. So think comprehensive, think design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Those are our core businesses, different than our other businesses, which are more parts, pieces, and services related. Next slide. So as part of the professional services group, we first we start off with an audit, which is we are at the completion of the audit for the New Jackson County Sheriff's Office. And as part of that evaluation, our focus was on the HVAC systems that operate that facility. As you'll recall, that facility was not used for several years before the county took that over. The county took it over on an emergency basis in order to move the sheriff's office there after Hurricane Michael. And so the result of that is the sheriff and his team have tried to move their offices around into what was formerly a housing residence for the folks that were out of that site. So the result of that is that we evaluated and are delivering a design, a way to enhance the operations of that facility. Of course, as part of the first phase, we have a guarantee associated with the financial outcome of that business. That was a 15-year project, about a $3.1 million investment for the county, and it's scheduled to deliver about $4.3 million in savings over the course of that term. So the project pays for itself in terms of the design, the construction, the ongoing measurement and verification, and ongoing services. Next slide. So what we're offering is an end-to-end solution. It's all about comfort, efficiency. Codes are really important. So when you change the operation of a facility like what you have at the sheriff's office, there's different loads. So as an example, a person that's sleeping in a bed, or a number of people sleeping in bed at one of the areas of that new sheriff's office like it was formerly operated, now you have less people in that facility. And so one of the things that our engineers did was they evaluated the loads of the facility, the actual HVAC loads, how much heat comes off from the lights, how much heat comes off from people's body temperature, other processes and other machinery that's out in that facility. So it's really important in an environment like Florida to make sure that not only are you getting cool air into the facility, that you're not introducing heat and humidity that causes rust and other major issues within the facility. So that's part of what we do as part of this process. Next slide. And so this initiative is really just an extension of the first phase that we did with the county. So we're talking about standardizing the equipment, the systems. That one of the key benefits of the first phase that we did with the county was it allows your team to manage the various properties more efficiently. They can understand them, they can operate them. We include a significant amount of training as part of the first phase, and that'll be a continuing effort, and that's what we're proposing as part of this initiative. The key thing here is you're getting comprehensive, you're getting clear scopes, and you're getting a clear outcome. And that's something that's different than some of the other things that you may be considering. Next slide. So our experience is vast in Florida. I mentioned our project here, but we work with a ton of counties. We've experienced a similar situation that what you're seeing here at your facility with high humidity, noise levels that are very, very problematic, and a number of other things. And so we have a vast amount of experience that we can apply here and make this project a success. Next slide. So a little bit of history about how we got here. So the county went through a competitive process back in 2015. We're still under contract for that first phase of work. And as part of this phase, which we executed the design agreement back in December of last year, we actually hired a third-party engineer, Mr. David Watford, based here locally. And the goal there was we wanted a licensed professional who was not Johnson Controls, who would provide us with an extra set of eyes, an extra set of ears to help collaborate on what the right solution is. And so what I'm going to go through is the solution that we came up with. Next slide. So the facility we're talking about was constructed in 1998, 1999 timeframe. So it's a building with very good bones overall. Now there are some improvements that I know that the county is looking at down the road, maybe a roof replacement at some point, some modifications, et cetera. So we've taken all those things in mind when we come up with our proposal. The key thing that we found is that there's rust and other problems, moisture buildup that are a result of either the systems not operating appropriately, some of them aren't working at all, and your staff has done a diligent job to get some of them back operating. But other things, wall sweating and other issues that are created because the airflows in the building are not designed for the way the building is being operated currently. So one example of that may be something that you see in your offices on a regular basis. You have a staff member maybe that is hot all the time or cold all the time, right? So you have a person that turns down the thermostat, they get it colder, another person turns on a heater. And so what you have in this facility with 22 different systems is you have a lot of operations that are running simultaneously and interacting with one another negatively. So you have simultaneous heating and cooling, which becomes a problem for the control of that facility. Sheriff's Office, as I mentioned, it's unique. It requires biohazard evidence room. So it has to have a dedicated exhaust for anything that is deemed a biohazard to protect the occupants of that facility. That's something that the facility does not have that we identified as part of this effort. There's also a lack of vapor barriers and insulation. So you think about a wall, like the wall around this room, that walls out in that facility don't necessarily go all the way up to the roof deck. So I mentioned the air changes that are interacting with one another. That's another issue we found. It also impacts the exterior of the building. So where the sally port is, you have warm, moist air intruding into the building, which makes the air conditioning systems operate in a much less efficient manner. Next slide. So what we came up with as part of this recommendation is 10 different initiatives, and I'll run through each one of them very briefly. So you have heat pumps out in the facility right now primarily. They're not operating in the appropriate mode. So what that means is they need to be reprogrammed so they are getting the efficient use of those heat pumps. A heat pump is much more efficient than a traditional air conditioner. That's just one example. Ductwork modifications. So in the way that the building is occupied currently, there's less occupants in some areas and there's more occupants in other areas versus what the building was originally designed. So in order to get appropriate airflow into those different areas, the ductwork needs to be modified. The dispatch area and radio dispatch area right now, it's not isolated. So that's that interaction between the various systems and the airflow. So that's another issue. The exhaust fans within the facility are not operating appropriately. So everywhere from the bathrooms to the common areas, those exhaust fans are part of what makes the building run overall appropriately. Those need to be replaced. Yes, sir.
The exhaust fan, they're working or they're not working?
They're not working. Yes, sir.
So that's improperly.
Not operating?
That's correct. That's right. They're not operating appropriately. And as I mentioned earlier,
No.
You flip the switch, does it come on?
some of them do, but primarily they do not. Yes, sir. And I mentioned earlier, there was on the previous slide, the building actually was built with a smoke exhaust system for occupants that were there that could not exit the premises in the event of a fire. That system needs to be decommissioned. Okay.
How many units is out there now? 22?
22 different systems, yes, sir. So the return air path is a critical component. So, we pull in, the Florida Building Code requires that outside air or fresh air be pulled into the facility. Part of that air needs to return back to the fan coil unit that actually blows the air out into the spaces. Right now, because of some of the walls that have been constructed throughout the facility, that air does not have the ability to return. So essentially that means that the air has to come from somewhere. So more air is being pulled from outside, which means a higher utility bill. I mentioned the biohazard evidence area for the exhaust for that facility, that particular area. We don't have that. Dedicated outside air units. So the units that are installed currently, and some of the systems are new, I think 8 of them are new. They were installed back when the facility first got operational. They are not designed to handle the warm, humid air that's in Florida. And so the result of that is that the air does not get dried out before it hits the diffusers in the space. So that's what's causing the moisture within the walls and some of the other areas. The obsolete HVAC equipment, some of the systems are 20 years old. The average life expectancy for those systems is between 15 and 20 years. And so your staff has done a couple of things to replace control units, et cetera, to keep the units operational. But by and large, there are a number of systems that are beyond their useful life. So essentially, if you replace any major components, so think a compressor or a blower motor, you're essentially just throwing good money after bad because the shells of the units are also due for replacement. Now, there are some options that we've evaluated with the staff about the systems that are new, that are missized. And one of those recommendations is when we extract those units, we would give those back over to the county so you can install those at one of your other facilities that may have needs that we did not address as part of the first phase. And then the last one is test and balance. This is the most critical component of the overall project. So I mentioned 22 systems at a 40,000 square foot facility with doors and walls. The test and balance is really what provides us with the end measure that says, did what we do work? And if not, how can we tweak it to make it work? So it's a critical component that we're including as part of this proposal. And it's something that certainly would be the last step. Now, I've had some discussions with the staff about this particular project and understanding the nature of the facility and how things are in a state of flux from time to time. What we are recommending as part of this project is taking each one of these proposals on a step-by-step process. So what would that look like to the county? What that would mean is we would start with the units that are not operating first. We would start with those first, redesign them, replace them, and we would bring a proposal to you on a parts and pieces basis for you to elect to move forward with that work or not. And then once we get done with that next step, then you have to go to the next step in the process, one of these other proposals, because they all interrelate with one another, but they can be done independently. And so that's what the proposal were provided to the county. It's a little bit different than our normal approach. Normally, we would do all these things at once comprehensively, but after some feedback from the staff, we work with our team to devise a way to do this systematically and programmatically so you can make the decision over time. And so we may get through list number, let's say 7 of 10, and that may solve 90% of the problems within the facility, at which point the amount of investment that a county would make would be limited there. And then the building would go back to the operation that you would propose. Next slide. So this talks about the programmatic step-by-step. So right now we're in the data collection phase. We're going to analyze that data, which we've already done some of that. We're going to apply the changes, and then we're going to evaluate the results. The key thing is it's all about being operationally efficient. It's all about being a collaborative effort, working with the sheriff and the facility staff to make sure the things that we're proposing, but it's systematic alignment. And so one of the challenges that we see a lot of clients have is that they'll go make a change to one area and say, hey, we fixed that. And then 3 months later, they're at another area because they've created a problem somewhere else. I describe it as a whack-a-mole scenario. So this approach will prevent the whack-a-mole scenario where you're actually addressing things and you're thinking about those other variables on a step-by-step basis. Next slide. So this proposal does not require the county to come up with any upfront capital. I know that we're in a different environment, post Hurricane Michael and all the other things going on. So this allows you to make the investment over time. It does pay for itself over the 15-year term and allows you to address all the moisture and HVAC issues that you have in the facility to provide for efficient operation. And really, when I've talked with staff, this is really about just the next step in the process of the partnership that we already have with the county. So this is taking a new facility that wasn't underneath your purview when we first originally did our project and allow you to provide those efficiencies in a consistent manner to this new facility. So next slide. So what we have included, obviously safety is critical. We're in a different environment. I mentioned that earlier. We have engineering, construction, the cost of funding, procurement was one of the key things. When we did our first phase, we engaged several local contractors on the electrical and the mechanical side to make the improvements. So we would envision that same process to be followed here. And it'll be something where we're providing, if you may have seen in the proposal, we're providing an open book proposal. So you will see all the bids from the various subcontractors. You'll see our hourly rates. You'll see the project management. You see our overhead and profit, and it's a way for us to work through this in a partnership for you to understand what you're buying and what necessary improvements need to be made. Next slide. So what we're proposing, obviously, in October, we had our first concept meeting when the county called and said, hey, we have an issue with this facility. We would like you to take a look at it. We've spent the last, 5 or 6 months developing a solution. We're here at our presentation to the board. And I know that the occupants of the facility are looking to see some improvements. So we would quickly mobilize and start making these improvements as soon as next month. And we would expect that it would take over the course of till the end of the year. So sometime around the November timeframe, provided that everything stays on the upward trajectory in terms of our economic outlook, right? And our availability to access the site, that would progress over the course of the next 5 or 6 months. So with that being said, next slide, any questions? And like I said, I'm very engaged with the project, but I know Craig Miller from our team has spent a lot of time with the staff and with the engineer, so he can answer any specific technical questions that you may have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just for my knowledge, so that building has evolved somewhat, you might come on up to them, I want to bounce them back and forth to you. That building is obviously a single purpose original building, with 100 beds. The facility has morphed somewhat to where it is now, and may morph again in the future based upon the needs of the sheriff and future sheriffs, because this one's retiring, unfortunately. But what effects will that have? I mean, if this thing continues to kind of, they expand some or they close walls off as the need grows within that department, what tweaks will we have to do that? Would that be something, obviously can't forecast that because the needs maybe not known now, but I mean, and the walls on the ceiling shares, 8 inches thick, solid concrete. So I mean, it's gonna be hard to redesign that engineering wise, with that much load bearing, but what would be something that keeps us from having to dump more money into it in the future if something changes to the point that airflow changes, the diameters of the room changes, what would that have financially to us?
Certainly hard to introduce myself.
Yes,
So,
please.
I'm Craig Miller with Johnson Controls.
Thank you.
And Mr. Hill, to address your question, certainly hard to predict the future and the changes that might happen. I think with the system and the type of system that we're proposing, I think provides at least some additional flexibility. And Justin had mentioned the outside air, some dedicated outside air systems. The systems that are there today aren't good systems for eliminating the moisture load in the building. And so thereby separating it with these dedicated outside air systems that are created specifically to provide neutral air into the space. Adding or subtracting one of the smaller 22 units that are there today, those units then become more temperature based, right? So they're going to make sure that the temperature that's set for that zone is achieved. While this outside air unit provides the right refreshment or the right turnover rate of that outside air. You could potentially oversize that slightly, but again, there's only so much square feet. So it's certainly a big challenge. And if all of a sudden we said we're going to go back to putting 10 plus people in one of the cell block areas, that would require some significant design changes.
So our staff in the future and currently, well, if this passes, could our staff then, if the need, or the sheriff's staff also, could the sheriff work with y'all before they implemented something to kind of get some input from y'all during that process?
Yes, sir.
And change that way, you're not going to create something.
Yes, sir.
I mean,
As a matter of fact, we had some discussions with the staff. There's an area that's the cafeteria now that may be used. For example, we talked about the EOC and the demand that was put on the existing EOC and the potential for that. So what we would do in collaboration with the staff was essentially provide for provisions for those things, right? So that things like if we're going to go up and cut a wall and there may be an area where we need ductwork to come through, we can go ahead and make 2 cuts, one for the ductwork we're installing now and another one with a cover over it currently. So that's just one example that won't negatively impact your ability to do it and provides that provision for you to do it. So same thing with the outside air units. We can absolutely, and so that's why this step-by-step process really allows us the opportunity to collaborate. So we can move from, each section of the building programmatically.
Mr. Peacock?
What What's the ceiling made of?
In the cell block areas, it's, as was mentioned, I think about 8-inch concrete. So there's a,
Poured concrete?
I think so. I'm mechanical, I'm not 100% certain, but it's certainly
What about the
difficult.
walls?
Block walls, I think all block and or poured concrete.
With concrete poured in them?
Mhm. Very substantial.
How tall is this ceiling?
It varies by area. In the cell block areas, I think it's about 8 feet in the cell blocks. And then again, there is that flooring that's about 8-inch thick concrete. And then the mechanical rooms that are above those areas, it's a pitched roof, but at the highest point, it's maybe 5 or 6 feet. Difficult access for those areas where the fan blower sections are installed above the cell areas.
With this thing being designed as a jail, obviously they don't want air moving around in there. So if you go in and put in new ductwork, what are you doing? Where are you going to run it, and how are you going to solve the problem?
Sure. So as Justin mentioned, there is a smoke exhaust system that was required due to the usage of the facility in the past. So our current plan is to reuse that smoke exhaust ductwork that's in the soffit areas at the perimeter of the building, to use that as our supply ductwork area for 2 new outside air systems.
Are you going to be pulling fresh air from outside?
Yes. So again, the
How
goal.
are you going to do that?
So that would be, right now, our preliminary design would be 2, they're called dedicated outside air systems, DOAS for short, and potentially located in the crux of each end of the building. And then again, using the outside, the previous smoke exhaust system, using that previous ductwork that's there to blow the air from an on-grade outside unit into the space above the current
But
cell
you would
areas.
run it above the ceiling, right?
Correct. We would be running it down in each section, the main corridor, the control areas, not in the cell areas. So we would be using that central area to expand out to all of the different units, right? For each half of the building,
Obviously, each
but above the
cell-
ceiling.
Each cell has at least one duct, right?
Mhm.
One open register.
Correct.
Or
There's,
do they have to?
so there's a larger unit, 7.5 ton by size for each of the main, the cell areas,
blocks.
cell block areas. And again, those are the ones that most likely need the most significant change because there's not all that people load. But again, we would be bringing that outside air in. We might have to certainly cut either the flooring above or sidewalls of that mechanical room space to bring in this fresh outside air into a place that we can then redistribute it to the different 22 units.
I'm concerned that we're going to spend a lot of money running ductwork above, and we could easily drop down and run it in the ceiling, because this is no longer a jail. Wouldn't we save a lot of money and then just punch holes through those cinder block walls? And for return, why don't we cut holes in these metal doors and put louvers in them? Have y'all looked at that?
So there, you definitely need to look at where you're cutting the holes, et cetera, and which units are supplying each area, right? You want the air from one system to be going back to itself. So just with the modifications that have been to date, there are some changes that need to be done to help balance the system today. Overall, I'd have to take a look at it, but it's certainly possible that the ductwork could be run below. I think there's still some substantial walls that you'd have to some sidewalls that you'd have to go through for any ductwork cuts. But certainly, all of that in a final design, if there
Well,
was.
you're going to be running ducts in the attic and probably having to punch holes, because the ones I saw, the registers were in the sidewall.
For the cell areas, they come down in a controlled space chase
Yeah.
that comes into each cell. So we wouldn't necessarily be affecting anything inside the cells. Where we would be, our largest impact would be up and down serving all of the different office areas that have been built out that are towards the center section of the building.
I'm just concerned that we're gonna spend a lot of money trying to heat and cool a jail when we can change it and make it more cost effective by utilizing, doing something for office space.
So,
Go ahead. I mean,
Mr. Peacock, and I appreciate that. I think what we are, to go back to Commissioner Hill's question, we are redesigning the system for an administrative area in the event that there are some areas that the county says, hey, this may be a little bit different, or at some point we may change it. For example, adding a meeting space for EOC, we can provision for those items. So that's part of the challenge. That's the reason why you're having the challenges you are around the moisture and the humidity, is because it's designed as a jail, but it's being operating as an administrative. So
Right.
there's going to be some reduction, for example, in sizes of units versus what you have now. Because the reality is that those systems are short cycling, basically. They're not intended to treat the humidity from the outside air as the way they're designed now. And you don't have the load, so it hits the temperature set point before the air gets dried off. So it's a problem that just continues to exacerbate itself.
Okay, you said we had 8 new systems out there,
Yes, sir.
and they're oversized.
They replaced them like in kind. So whatever was there, I
They went
believe
back
that's
to
how the
it.
state contract was written, put it back the way that it was.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
we have no recourse on that, I assume. I got one more question, and I'm gonna shut up.
okay, go ahead, and then we get Commissioner Lockett in.
You said we would save over how many years?
15 years. Yes, sir.
15 years, we'll
Yes, sir.
save more than enough to pay for it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How much do you think we're going to save?
So I've talked with the staff about this extensively. You are, I haven't seen the numbers from the last 6 weeks, but your staff is spending money on repairing those units right now. So there's savings to be determined on the operations and maintenance side. The county is going to have to make a significant capital investment in the HVAC system over the course of the next 15 years. I mentioned the units, they're already obsolete. You're going to have to make that investment. Right. So savings, budget offset, whatever terminology, a lot of people use it different ways. There are utility savings that we believe are going to be achieved by doing this project. The challenge that we have specifically around utilities is that the building hasn't been operational for more than a year, right? So for us to be able to determine that baseline, it's very challenging, right? So that's something that we talked about very early on with staff, understanding that the building is new, it is operating differently than it did previously. So even if we got back the numbers from the states from 2012 or the last time that they operated it, that's not numbers that we could use to develop a utility baseline.
We got 22 units now. How many are you putting in?
10.
No, sir. No, sir. So we think the likelihood, again, it's a step-by-step process, and things like this about ductwork, routing, and other things where the county wants to provide input, but we would anticipate that you may go down to about 17 or 18 systems from 22 with the 2 dedicated outdoor air units. So it'll be a reduction in systems.
Can y'all give us a GMP on that?
So the original proposal was a GMP for all these scopes of work. But one of the things we heard from staff was there may be some changes in the building. So how do we address things that are urgent with that? So yes, sir.
Which brings me to my point.
Yes, sir.
Sheriff, how many cells are out there?
There's about 100.
Okay, so I understand what y'all trying to do, you're trying to make a perfect world out of it for us. You know, and I believe there's little bitty baby steps, there's A plan, B plan, and C plan. I think the $1.5 million, is that your projected cost?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is a staggering amount of money. But I think before we decide we want to do this, we need to decide what the future use of that building and those 100 cells are going to be. If you're going to reduct them or redo them for cell-like structures, you're going to be heating and cooling cells. You know, maybe that's not what we want to do. Sheriff, do you see anything in the future? I mean, I know your days are short, but 100 cells, that's quite a bit
Yeah,
of.
that's quite a bit. Right, out of the 100 cells, we're probably using maybe a third of them for storage, evidence, those type of things. The other 2/3 are probably, you know, may have some articles stored in their computers or whatever. But probably the cell blocks are not being fully utilized. Some of them are not actually, maybe some older desk or whatever. But
I mean, we're
probably,
heating and cooling older desks,
well,
what we're doing.
but they're not right now, they're not heating and cooling, that's the problem. They're, those areas are actually, in the wintertime, they're cold, summertime, they're hot. And I don't know whether it's because of, you know, the ducting is not designed. You know, we'd probably be more beneficial having probably half the cells gone, but the cost involved in taking some of the walls down 8 inches of concrete above it would be, I would imagine, quite expensive. I don't know.
I understand, but at the same time, I just don't see spending money to heat and cool cells that you're going to use.
Most of the air we're using is within the general confines of the building itself. It has 6 wings, 3 on each end, and one of those wings has been dedicated to evidence, and that all the cells are utilized in that one. One of the areas that was utilized for medical, well, not so much medical, I guess it was for if you had a problem with one of the inmates, that you would actually put them in this bigger housing area, and so that whole wing is evidence.
An inmate, as far as,
Like, for example, if they had one of the boys that was causing a problem at the time, they would put them in this particular area, had 3 or 4 cells together, so.
I understand, but you wouldn't use any of those cells to house anybody, correct?
No,
In the past.
in the past.
Oh, I understand.
Right.
Yes,
Now, that area houses, such things as firearms, it houses evidence, you know, to be sent to the lab, returned cases, those type of things.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. So Commissioner Lucky, to go back to that point, what we're saying is that the systems that are there now were designed to have those occupants in it. And as a result, they're short cycling, and that's what's introducing humidity. And so what we are recommending is that as modification of those systems, they are sized for things like storage and other things. So they're planning for that less load, so they're not going to be short cycling. That's the intention.
You mentioned earlier in your presentation, I didn't get the exact amount, but you said that I've got a savings question by 4-point-something million, and then you said a 3.1 million.
Yes, sir.
Explain those to me again.
Yes, sir. So back in 2016, I believe, I think 4 of you guys were here when we did the first phase of the project. We did 22 facilities. We did a $3.1 million project, and the savings for that project, I believe, was projected to be 4.3 million over 15 years. So that was the cash flow for that project.
Okay, and so
Yes,
when
sir.
you mentioned savings, it's not necessarily savings for us in our electric bill, even though the bill would be cheaper, but that's how y'all are paid, by the savings that's generated from the prior utility bill to future utility bills, correct? That's how you get paid, is in that gap.
So, I would add
Is that
one,
yes or no?
It's a piece.
it's a portion of, what I would say is that I don't think it's a yes or no question, sir. What I would say is we get paid like a general contractor. The project gets paid for by the savings, and those savings accrue over 15 years. And those savings annually are appropriated to pay for the financing of the project. So we don't share the savings, I guess I thought that's the way I heard the question. We don't share the savings, or we don't get paid based on the savings. Now, if the savings are short, if the savings don't accrue like we promised, then we have to write a check for the difference. So if we say we're going to save 100,000 and we only save 90, we have to come back with a check for the county for $10,000. That's the way the program works. Similarly, on the costing side, in the event that the cost is above the 3.1 million, then we have to eat the additional costs. So that's the GMP portion of the way this program works. So there were a couple of scenarios where we actually gave money back to the county because you were in the process of renovating the courthouse. And so we actually gave that money back because I believe you were doing it with, maybe it was Ajax. I think you were doing it with Ajax, and they were renovating the second floor. We had the restrooms excluded as part of our proposal. And so we actually gave that money back to the county. So, so that's the intention of the program according to the statutes. It's GMP, and the project pays for itself with utilities, operational, and capital.
So. This is a finance question. Is Danielle?
She's on the line.
Danielle? Okay. How much would this cost add to our additional debt that we have now with the Bank of America?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We're talking about 1.5 million.
Yes, sir. It's about, 15 years, 1.5 million is $100,000 a year without, I think the interest rate's 2%. So it's about 120,000.
So we're paying like 200-something thousand a year now.
Yeah.
Right?
Right now, at the end of this year, we've just made a payment on March 18th. We have $2,395,078.66 left on the original 3.1, which actually I think is 2.933 after they're
Correct.
giving the money back.
Mhm.
So it wasn't actually 3.1.
And there was a grant. There was a grant at the library.
So we
for us.
basically paid the 4 years of the 15-year note.
Yes.
You just had to mark, so we're.
And it goes up, the note actually goes up every year, the gross payment amount. Next year will be 220,000, then it goes to 226. Looks like it goes up.
Based on our current debt we have, not factored
Not
in
counting anything
what
on
the
that.
1.5 would be.
Yes, sir. So there's $1.5 million, he said, $100,000 for the principal. And it'd be, you have to add the interest. on
Yes,
top
sir.
of that.
So if we're paying 220,
Now you'd be looking at probably 340. Yes.
Basically, we start the clock for 15 years, basically.
Well,
On this
$1.5
million.
not for me.
Okay, Mr. Spires?
Yeah, I want to ask a couple of questions here. You mentioned that you're gonna recommend going from 22 units to 18.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's only a reduction of 4. Could those 22 not be utilized in some kind of more space dedicated to be cooled and heated?
Yes, sir. So we are recommending for the systems so for the 8 systems that were installed by the state last year, if one of those systems is removed, we would give that back to the county for them to utilize. That campus had a lot of different areas where you're making improvements. Perhaps you would want to use it there or one of your other facilities. The approach that we have is we want to try to utilize all the existing equipment that we can because, that's the efficient way to develop the project. So it's not going to be a wholesale change out, but the first thing is we got to get the systems that are out there operating in the correct mode. We got to get those operating in the appropriate mode, number one. And number two is for the systems that are oversized, there is no easy solution. You can't set those back because they only have one stage compressors as an example. So there's not a variable speed where you can set them back to a lower mode as one example. So we've gone through all that with your staff, but the intention is for us to take those systems that are in good working condition and hand those back over to the county so you can go make proactive replacements at some of your other facilities that need them.
Does
Yes,
the
sir.
installation appear,
We're not reducing units. So, but we might be sizing.
That's resize.
Yeah, so just to be clear, there's 22 units, and so that would stay 22, and then we would, our current plan would be to add the additional outside air units. So I'm sorry, it's not an actual elimination, but several of those units we might look to replace with smaller sized units.
So you're saying there's still gonna be 22?
Yes, yes.
does the,
Again, to reutilize the ductwork that's there with the additional modifications that we might need to do because of different walls and different applications that have happened at the facility.
does the installation appear to be adequate? The existing installation?
The insulation.
That's
Yeah, I didn't specifically look at the insulation, and I'm not sure that there is like a residential situation where there's blown in or layered insulation because of the type of system and type of building that it is. It's really just concrete block and mechanical room systems above, attic space.
You had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just, and it feels good to say that you're gonna have 8 units you can use somewhere else in the county. But we've had other buildings, places we've taken units out there and we've never used them. And I don't know that it's gonna be a specific application for what we take out of there to put somewhere else. So I mean, I don't really wanna kid ourselves thinking that we're gonna save money down the road by buying a unit at another building we have when it's not gonna be
Right.
feasible to do
Right.
that.
So we're going to continue to have 22
Yes, sir.
plus.
Plus two. Again, the whole goal there is to separate what they're good at, right? For the type of system and how this building was originally designed, it was never a good design to handle the humidity load that happens here in Florida.
So how many of the 22 is going to have to be replaced?
Right now, there's approximately, I think it's 8 or 9 of the units that are still original that weren't replaced in the state contract.
So you're going to replace
The 8 or 9, yes, is what.
Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you said most of those were obsolete.
No, so the state replaced, I think it was about 9, but what they replaced the systems with they were originally air conditioners. And an air conditioner, all it does is cool. And so then you have to use electric strip heat to provide heating. When they did the actual installation, they installed heat pumps. And a heat pump basically has a reversing function. It can both cool and heat. But they disabled the heating section of these newer heat pumps, these 8 or 9 newer systems that were put in as part of the state contract. Because the contract was written as air conditioning only, they disabled them so they would use air conditioning and electric strip heat. So our goal for a portion of those newer units would be to re-engage the controls to allow those newer systems, the 8 or 9 newer systems, to operate as heat pumps, and then look at replacing I say 8 or 9, we know there's 22, so my numbers are slightly off. But the existing systems that do need to be replaced, we'd be looking at replacing them, but also replacing them with the right sized equipment, right? So there may be a 3-ton unit and that goes back as a 3-ton unit, but there may be a 7.5-ton unit that may come back as a 4-ton unit, or, so that would be what our design engineering creates. Or
Because I'm thinking is that if you take a unit that's not working efficiently, put it in another building that's not working efficiently, do we really realize the cost savings?
Right.
You're not gonna be able to use practically, in reality, you're not gonna use the 8 or 9 you take offline and we store them somewhere, which I'm curious where we put them if we did have them. But they'll just sit there in storage and nobody's gonna, we just won't be able to use them and match up with what we got. Wouldn't that be a fair assessment?
It's certainly possible, right? And again, it's most likely the 7.5-ton units, but these are common sizes, so there certainly is a possibility that you may find the need for the use.
Still not clear on, there's 22 units out there. There's 8 that was replaced after the hurricane.
Yes.
But you said the others were obsolete And the 8 that they put in there are not good for what they're being used for, so. Am I right? And then I asked, well, how many is gonna be replaced? And you said, well, that's what we said, 22.
Right, I think,
You
so- I
didn't-
think,
you said
I think
7 or 8 or
some,
something.
I think
don't
some were
understand.
replaced in a more recent time frame, and so the numbers aren't exactly, the original build.
Are they obsolete or not? Can they be used? The 22 out there, how many of them's gonna stay out there and be used?
Repurposed somewhere else in that building.
Yeah,
Or-
yes, in that building.
Right, I believe about, 16.8. So about 14 of the units, again, my
Give or take.
give or take, would probably need to be replaced. But again, of the 8 units that have been replaced, some of those might be resized, right? So it's a combination of replacing older units and resizing some of the newer units.
Resizing you, taking that now, and putting a new one in.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. Mhm.
I think I had.
Yeah, and I think maybe what will help me, and it sounds like I'm not the only one, is a breakdown of what the ages of the 22. Let's just take the 22
Certainly.
and just clean the page. What's the age of, obviously, 8 of them are newer units based on the thing, but that place was not used. Yeah.
I have it in my
So
computer.
we don't say just shy, of a year, just north of a year and a half on 8 of them.
Yes,
Just
sir.
for kicks and giggles.
Yeah.
But you also have from February of 2011, when that facility was shut down, until mid-spring of 19-ish, give or take, before they reoccupied it. So we know those things, for better press, was 8+ years old, hadn't been used.
Mhm.
So of the 8 units that may be undersized or newer, less than 2 years old, how many of those are gonna be replaced? I just personally, I don't wanna get stuck with 14 units that's 8.5 years old or older. And then be repurposed. I mean, for 1.5 million, I'm thinking in my mind, you're replacing 22 units and they don't have pretty little stickers on them that says 2020 on them. And then we're moving forward for a number of years, knowing that they're all starting at the starting line together. But now we got 14 units that's various of ages, because we don't have a record that I know of previous to 2018, what them ages are. They could be free, they could be there in March of 1998 when they opened the facility up.
We have all of the ages, and I apologize.
Okay,
for
and I
not
like
having
to, I mean, just me, I'm just speaking, I might be speaking other, I like to see that, because the cost analysis, as y'all well know way more than I would, the cost analysis is gonna be on those units over a lifetime. And starting at the start line from 1 and moving forward, that's an investment. But if you're starting with a 9-year-old unit, a 17-year-old unit, that's a cost that we don't bear during that time. So that's one thing I'd just like to see if we can get those numbers. And my other couple of questions I had was, Sheriff, how many of those units do you store like DNA and stuff that has to be at a temper-related temperature? I mean, I know you said we use about the constant speed, let's say, constant temperature. Because if not, can't we use just general airflow in those? I'm just, from not me knowing anything as far as this, but most of those 100 cells, 33% of them, roughly 30 some of them are being used. But how many of them do you actually need to be the constant temperature regulated AC heat? 10, maybe a third of the third?
Well, you're using the whole wing,
But those doors are isolated, if they're shut now, they're basically self-contained refrigerators, so to speak.
one area is used for evidence, that's pretty well all occupied, I forget how many cells it were. 16 in each wing.
Right.
So that whole
16.
section is 16, plus some larger cells are all used for evidence.
Right.
All right, then you have an area that, would be utilized for storing of weapons and equipment,
Right.
and that needs to be maintained.
Right. But now, if they were just regulated with fresh airflow versus controlled air control on temperature, would that make a difference?
Well, that would be the
control
only
the
concern
humidity.
would be
Well, yeah.
the moisture. You know, you've got concrete, summertime, it might be a problem with the moisture content. If you could isolate probably 4, or if you could take away 4 out of the, I don't know, well, out of the 6 wings, and separate them where it's just a standalone or whatever. You know,
Yeah,
they're basically used for storage, I mean, at this point.
Yeah, and that's probably my question, Sheriff, is because Commissioner Lockheed's got a good point. I mean, we don't know what, and you don't know, past few months, what that facility may morph into or not. And my concerns is again, from a long term, because 1.5 million, I mean, I was shocked meeting with the administrator. We were guessing somewhere 100-something thousand, but we didn't have a clue. So that was my first initiate to the 1.5 mil. But my concerns is that if I know that out of the 22 units that Johnson Control would tell me they're gone, repurpose them, resell them, sell them for scrap metal, I don't know, but you're starting with 22 new units, ventilation and all the engineering stuff and cost that goes with installation, that I would feel a little bit better about 1.5. That's my concern, is just from me, just standing there, where are we gonna be at on these units? Because I definitely don't want to invest that kind of money, and we already got one foot in the grave with some of those units that's gonna be still repurposed of that. That's my concern. That's all I have, Chairman.
I guess, go ahead. My concern is that we're gonna heat and cool a lot of space back there that we're not even gonna use for a long, long
Partly,
time.
like I said, you can do away with 2/3 of the cells as far as heating and cooling, and really, it's not gonna hurt us. The problem that I see, which has been the problem, is that's part of the airflow. Those cells are part of the return. And if there's a way to, we put a wall, sheet rock wall, insulated wall, I think it's insulated, between the cells that actually extend out and the big areas, the big rooms there that we utilize for offices, because the cells are just not beneficial except for storage.
Yeah. Chairman, and I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know, and I've seen it done, where if you have a lot of unused space, now you can, I know the ductwork's intermingled, but I can tell you, if you can plan to just not use some of those wings, and you can do the ductwork and have that as what you want to do is phase 1 or phase 2, and have the future, a future use for that, and have it where all you have to do is either reduct it or whatever, but you can cut it off.
That's what
You
we've
can
done.
cut it off. I just hate to see us
Yes, sir.
again, heat and cool 100 cells out there, and we're not gonna come near using that many.
Yes, sir.
What's the square footage on those? Just get, there's 6 cells, there's the cells, I calculated 16 to be 96 cells cumulatively.
Right.
But what's the square footage of one of those wings? Share past the common area from the cell entrance to those 6 wings, what's that, 40 feet wide, maybe? Your cells are 10, you got 20.
I don't think it's that wide. It's probably as much.
30.
We don't have a floor plan anywhere that shows any of that.
That's exactly what I was writing here. Do we have a floor plan that shows the breakdown for each one of these units? What?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Unit number 1, what area does it serve?
There's some,
Certainly, we have the original design drawings and have the mechanical ventilation system to say, yes, each unit has its.
Okay, was it built by the plans?
Right,
Supposed to.
relatively speaking, and then, yeah,
Do you have a copy of those set plans?
yes, sir.
What,
yes, just not to put up on.
I don't have them on my thumb drive, no, sir. I don't.
what are the sizes of the units that are out there?
Generally speaking, 3 ton, 4 ton, and 7.5 ton. A range of those units.
If we're gonna do something, I would prefer we get away with this 22, come up with a different system. They're not using all the space. I'm sure you could go there and punch a hole through the wall, put in put your
Window unit.
lines, there's a lot of things we can do. Run the lines, put the air handler in one of the cells, or whatever you need to do, put the compressor outside. And maybe have a wing with one unit controlling one wing.
And
And get a super efficient unit and set out there. I'm scared of 22, well, that means you got 22 headaches.
correct, 22 is certainly a good number of units, but if you lose a unit, you've only lost a small office that
If
could
we
be
lose a unit,
mislocated.
that's what we're gonna call you to come fix it. And
Um,
at this price, I would assume you'll be on your way.
Yes,
It'll
so,
be there. Dr. Spires.
Okay, Commissioner Hill had mentioned biohazard material. What, he mentioned DNA. What else is considered biohazard material?
You say some of the stuff that's in evidence?
Yes.
Well, we have everything from narcotics, drugs, weapons, anything you might collect at a crime scene that, you know, some of it's refrigerated, some of it is not refrigerated. That's probably the most critical area is the evidence.
Okay.
And the fact that, it's kind of, it's in a whole wing. I mean, we took one whole wing of the 6 and dedicated to that, plus an additional area that has, I think, 4 large cells in it that were, if they had a problem, inmate, then they would actually put them where they could monitor them better in a larger cell. So that one whole area is dedicated to things that need to have some type of humidity control and keep them cool. The other area of concern is where we keep the firearms, the ammunition, the equipment for issuing out to the deputies. That area consumes one whole wing. So that's 32. So you could actually, if you could separate the other section, which is a long, narrow building, basically, attached to this bigger building. If you could figure out some way to isolate those, and maybe if you wanted to have them at a different cooling or whatever separate, I don't know how that would work.
That's what I'm thinking, we can somehow isolate it and cool that area and not the entire.
We don't utilize that area. I mean, if it was not there, I mean, we would have to find somewhere to store stuff. But, you know, we store computers in one section, so probably half of the cells could be done away with, because I mean, we got it spaced out simply whichever is easiest to access from one point to the other. So you could actually eliminate probably half the wings.
Would that be something feasible from your perspective?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so what I would say, and this is the type of input we need. That's why we've structured it the way that we have. And so before we turn a wrench, the whole idea is we separate those task orders into a wing or the biohazard evidence to give the commission an opportunity to say that's what we want to do. So that's really what this agreement does. It provides us a vehicle to perform the work as you see fit. And so if we come to something, and to your point, Commissioner Peacock, and you say, well, why are we doing 22 systems and not one, right? That's something that we have the opportunity to collaborate.
I wouldn't do one, I'd probably do, you
Yes,
got
sir.
6 wings?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
But the key thing is that it's got to be engineered. That's the challenge that you have right now, right? And so if we would have come here today with plans for an engineered solution, right? And we get to this scenario where we may look at different wings or shutting down wings, then we got to go right back and start. And so that's what really this provides us a vehicle to do. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Rock.
I'm not totally against this project.
Yes, sir.
Don't get me wrong. I want to do it for the most efficient way that we need to get it done, and the most economical way that we can get it done. And I'm not prepared to take any action on this today, but I would be more in favor of doing a roll up your sleeves kind of thing, and we'll go out there and look, or you know, we can set two tables up, have the plans laid out, and look, and see what the best efficient use for the building is. And we don't have that yet. We don't have an efficient use of that building, other than just put it back and heat and cool all the square footage you have, and I understand, but I don't know that that's what we actually want to do. And sure, it'll take some engineering, but I think if we can just look at it, either through plans or have a site visit and meet out there and walk around and look and see, it might be that some of those wings, we may want to reallocate what you got there, Sheriff, and move some things around. What might make it more feasible to shut off more of that building that we're not going to use for many years to come.
They do have doors on the end that could be accessed from the outside. So, I mean, in theory, you could use it for a lot of different things.
Yeah, William, I want to the two-part flash with, what's the square footage? Is it 43,000? 40.
I think right about there, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But the plan, for future vision, we mentioned at one time, I think in the sidewalk office, was there EOC maybe being built out there? Was it gonna be contiguous with that building? Is there gonna be attachment, or do we totally segregate?
Well, it has to be attached in some way for it to qualify for HMGP.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking that is, that might be the time that you say.
Use a common outside wall, and that'll be what you have.
And then, that grant, again, we're looking at finance guys, this ain't done in person, as y'all well know, but the 1.5 scares the hell out of me, I'll be honest with you. Not saying it ain't worth it, it just does during our times, with two major events in less than 2 years. And so what I'm saying is that there might be an application period that we can put in and say, listen, this EOC building that we may or may not get can be funded through, that CDBG?
No, that's the HMGP.
Then that way, then we can attach that building to one of those 6 tentacles for all active purposes of that, and maybe join that into some cost analysis. I know that's a ways off, but we're also talking about, like Commissioner Lockie said, I mean, I like to have these plans in my hands and sit down with y'all. I know y'all got to drive and commute here, but that's where y'all get paid the big bucks, and get us over here to Lewis and have a site visit and just kind of explain, because I've got probably more questions I have raised in my hand right now.
Sure.
And so,
Yes, sir.
And that definitely Sheriff and his staff need to be involved, all of us need to be involved, and our staff need to be involved. I think that would be an excellent idea for us just to get out there and just kind of look and get some input futuristically, what we would like to see with what we have out there now, and maybe the other EOC buildings, that might be a project for y'all too at that time, so.
We don't want to spend 1.5 million and then have to redo it or be,
Sure.
just like the 8 new ones. I know.
Yeah, and in that situation, the state replaced with what was there.
Right.
The ones that were not.
That's where they do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, they looked at the drawings to see, saw what was there.
It wasn't nobody's fault, it was just a simple fact that, I don't know what they called, but I'm sure it wasn't cheap.
Well, that was eight units, and we talking 1.5 more.
You gotta understand that all six of those cell blocks had one common area for feeding and for them to be in. Each one of those has been blocked off.
Right.
So you've got 6 walls that we put up restricted to, we weren't using cells, so we felt that by putting the wall, and some of the walls are not that wide because they're only filling up the area you've seen them down the hallway. The biggest problem that I have at this point is the essence of time. And right now we got fans scattered up down the hall, I think. I know that you've been out there, because you saw that. I mean, James has been able to get some of it better than it was, simply by going out there and doing some stuff with the direction of these guys as to what they found and what James and his experience has been able to get going. It's better than it was, but it's still, we haven't made it to summertime yet. So I don't know, I don't know what it's gonna do. It's been really nice if it didn't have the wings on it. We've been probably a lot simpler, but those concrete walls in between the cells and the ceiling, I'm sure would be quite involved as far as taking some of them down. They're very structurally sound, but at the same time, it's the devil to heat and cool.
Ms. Williams?
2 things. One, I'm getting reports you're hard to hear, Commissioner Hill, so you could lean into the microphone. And then Pam is on the line. She wanted to just share some electric bill information. Pam, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I was comparing March's bill for the sheriff's office, the new sheriff's office, which was $5,731.66, to the jails, which for March was $9,073.33. The one thing about the units that are right now at the sheriff's office, those are all electric, they're not heat pumps. Heat pumps run more efficiently and more effectively, and so that was one of the reasons they were proposing some of those ideas. And we haven't even reached summer yet. Last September, the bill at the sheriff's office was $9,073.33.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we table this, allow staff to set up a meeting for staff, for us all as a group to get together, sheriff's office, all of us, parties that need be, and just get together, so that in the near future, get our priorities on the list, look at some of the options we have for other facilities maybe coming in there, and the percentage they're coming. So I just like to make a motion, like to table this for now and get some other ideas on the table.
Second.
For discussion.
Okay,
As long as we do this pretty quick.
Yeah, that's what I said, yeah, as soon as possible, yeah, absolutely.
okay, we got a motion by Commissioner Hill, second by Commissioner Peacock. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, like sign, motion carried 5-0. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
What, your old office, what are our plans for that at this point in time?
The old
Sheriff's office.
Sheriff's office.
Oh.
I'm trying to, I was not sure what I was gonna say. Well, we're looking at possibly seeing what kind of money at that, public workshop y'all did recently to put it out for bid and see if it's any interest and what kind of bids we get. Pam, can you speak to that process?
Yes, I have got it together and I showed it to an appraiser to make sure that I put all the information down. The only thing I have to do is get the actual legal, and it'll be ready to go out. They don't think it's going to be anywhere near $1 million though.
You're talking about $1 million as is or $1 million repaired?
No, $1 million as is or repaired.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it'd be worth $1 million as is.
So where are we at in what stage of repair does that building need?
It's not. We have not made it a priority because we were not going to be using it. We were thinking of selling it as is.
Now, selling it as is, taking consideration, you've got a tower, that controls all your radio
Cutting
equipment
that
for the
out.
county. You got a generator we just put out there a year and a half ago. It's all, all that is gonna be something that has to be secure.
Yeah.
How far is the tower from the, building?
About 4 or 5 feet,
That's what I thought.
maybe further than that, maybe 8 or 9 maybe.
Sheriff,
It's something that would probably take every bit of $1 million to put a new tower up.
What do you have still located out at the old sheriff's department? I know the tower's there.
A lot of junk.
A lot of junk, yeah.
We got some vehicles, we've got some records still. Actually, to be honest with you, some of the areas that we have some of the records stored are as well protected there as far as humidity goes in where we are at in the hallways of these storage, these cells right now.
So fuel's still out there? Cause I see a lot of.
Fueling out there. It could act, in my opinion, if it was my building,
it could be used.
I would utilize it, I would spend the money to get it built stronger than what it is, utilize it, that's just me.
Has the insurance been applied to that yet, or is there, you just never, I know we had it done, but there's money, is it pending?
Well, how much money, did we get from insurance on the sheriff's office?
I can't hear you.
How much money did we get, from the insurance for the sheriff's
Oh, hold on, I don't have that pulled up. I didn't know we were
That's
going
fine.
there.
She
Hold
can-
on a second.
It would make a great warehouse. I don't know if you have a need for a warehouse, but to me, you could go through and modify the structure for the roof. You would have a tremendous good warehouse that the county would own. And I know you've already discussed it, voted on it, but to me, the money that you're gonna have to spend to put another tower up, you gotta do it, have another one erected before you can take that one offline. I just think it would be a tremendous building for, I mean, you got a great slab. You just need to do some modifications. They built a floor in that facility to accommodate all those heavy Coca-Cola trucks. And it's, you know, it's certainly, I just think the building has potential just for the location of it.
How many square feet is it?
27,000.
Does it have a loading dock?
Not
does.
working.
Like,
Just well built.
Just to have, the problem with the building, the biggest problem with the building it was for us, the metal sides, they don't, I mean, the block only goes up, 8 or 9 feet. And then above it, you have the metal. And, it's just not in the past, we had discussed talking about putting a hard shelter in there for this site. We talked about a lot of things, but, I think the building itself could be utilized, if nothing else. You'd save more money, I think, by having at least as a warehouse for the county.
Okay,
Just an opinion.
any more questions for, we've already done. Thank y'all.
Yes, thank y'all.
Ms. William? did
I
you
don't have anything
anything?
else right now.
Okay, so we can take a break
Break.
before our next meeting.
Yes, sir.
We'll start back in 17 minutes. I was wondering about that.